Hi, Ashley here with HeartHookHome.com, and today we are going to make an Elizabeth cardigan for our little bear friend here. The Elizabeth cardigan is a free crochet pattern that you can find on HeartHookHome.com, and in that you will find all of the charts mentioned throughout this video, so be sure to check that for sizing and all of the good information that you need to get started. So the Elizabeth cardigan is made based on your body measurements. So first we're going to take our very first measurement, which is going to be the neck to hem height. So grab your measuring tape and put your tape right at the base of the neck here. Right at the base of the neck. Measure how long you want it to be. If you want it to be a little bit shorter, then you just go a little bit shorter. If you want it to be a little longer, you go a little longer. For him, I think 7 inches is going to be a really good length. So we'll go with the 7. Now you've got to remember that we need a collar on our cardigan, right? And you can't create armholes without having a collar. So since he's so short, I'm going to give him about a 2-inch collar. If he was a taller, full-size adult, we might do 5 or 6 inches, 7 inches, and of course that is all listed in the chart when you go look at the pattern on Heart Hook Home. So for him, I'm going to start at about 9 inches, which gives him 7 inches of body width or body height, and then another 2 inches for the collar height. Let me move him out of the way. We will need him later. Now, when you're picking your yarn doesn't really matter so much as the hook size you use with your yarn. So for this tutorial, I'm using Caron 1 pound. You can use whatever you like. I just like the 1 pound and I really like this color. So we're using this one. I do recommend making several gauges, swatch gauges. So make one with a 6mm, one with a 7mm, one with an 8mm, and then feel how that fabric feels. And if it feels like it's really nice and squishy, that's what you're going for. You don't want it too tight. If anything, you want it to be on the loose side because that'll make the cardigan hang really well in the front. Give it a good drape. So I'm going to get started. First, since we're working this cardigan vertically, I'm going to be making a chain, a foundation single crochet row of 9 inches. So if you need a tutorial for the foundation single crochet, you can find that on my YouTube channel or on my blog. I'll get that first one in there. And then I'm going to continue until this gets to 9 inches. If you do not like the foundation single crochet, it is okay for you to do a chain and mini bean your way back through, which we'll get to in just a second. But with the foundation single crochet, I find that I do a lot less frogging of ripping out my crochet because I know exactly how long it is and it's already worked up. If I do my chains and then mini bean back through, sometimes I get it a little bit too short, sometimes I get it a little bit too long, but the foundation rows really help get it to exactly the length that you need. So I'm going to continue making this until it's 9 inches long. I think that's probably going to be good. That's a little long actually. Now what we're going to do is we are going to make sure that this foundation row right here has a multiple of 2 because the mini bean consists of 2 stitches. There's the skip and then the mini bean. The skip, the mini bean. So you need to have a multiple of 2 across this row. So let's go ahead and count that out. We'll make sure that we've got a multiple of 2. I'm going to take these out and see how that measures because I wanted to have 24. That's 24. Let's see if that's long enough. Looks good to me. So I'm going to go with 24 for my starting row. Now for the second row, and you'll do this row that we're doing right here throughout the entire piece. So to start, you're going to chain 1 and turn. And then you're going to skip that first one and you're going to mini bean in the next. If you need a video tutorial or a written tutorial for the mini bean, I have a tutorial for that as well, both on HeartHookHome.com and on my YouTube channel. Mini bean is a really fast, pretty stitch and I love it. So I'm going to mini bean all the way to the end of this row. Okay, one more after this guy. You should end with a mini bean in the last stitch. So now we're going to decide how many rows to do in this part. So you might need to do 15 rows, you might need to do 20 rows. On mine, the adult sizes that I did between 45 and 65 rows. So it just really depends on how wide you want this part to be. Now, let's figure out how we're going to determine that, right? Let's take Mr. Bear again. Since this is the height of the cardigan and it is worked vertically, we're going to be working in rows across his body like this onto the other side. Then we will add the sleeves to that, right? So we need to figure out how wide to make this part, and to do that we're going to place our, oops, wrong end. We're going to place our measuring tape right at the top of his shoulder right here, and we're going to let that hang down to his natural waist. Your natural waist is right at the bottom of your ribs, right above your belly button, so it's right in the middle there. If you were to bend to the side, it's where that crease naturally happens. So his looks like it's about 4 inches. We're going to go with that. Now, on the charts in the pattern, you will notice that I go an extra 2 inches. So his natural waist measurement is 4 inches, and we're going to add 2 to that. So we're going to crochet for 6 inches. So, no. Yes, 6 inches. So we've got our 9 inches here, right? Now we're going to crochet until we have 6 inches this way. So we will continue in rows until we have 6 inches, and I will hook up with you then. Okay, I am nearing the end of the row where I should have 6 inches in total height. So let's take a look. I should have a piece that is about 9 inches, close enough, and 6 inches. Close enough, looks great, right? Now we're going to start the collar, the armhole and the collar. So to start, you're going to want to check your chart measurement, right? Or remember what you did for your collar. For him, we did a 2-inch collar. So what we're going to do, we're going to chain and turn the correct way. Okay, now I'm going to crochet for just 2 inches in to create that collar. Move that up. So now we've got our 2 inches. I'm going to crochet for as long as it takes to hit the end of my measuring tape. So right now I'm thinking that's going to be 1, 2, 3 mini beans. So I'm going to go into this one, go into this one, go into this one, and then I'm going to start my armhole. So let's do those 3. Now we always have a chain to close your mini bean stitch. So I did do that chain, and I am not going to count it in this next part. So this next part we are creating the armhole that will span just enough, you know, to make his armhole depth. So your armhole depth is dependent on what size you typically wear. I typically wear a size large, so I know that the armhole depth for a person that wears a size large is between 7.5 and 8 inches. So I always go on the larger side of that. So for me, I would hold this up and skip 8 inches. Since he's an itty bitty bear, he only needs a 2-inch armhole. So we're going to measure from that last stitch that we completed 2 inches over. So we're going to figure out how many mini beans is that. It looks like it's 3 again, right? So we are going to chain enough to skip these 3 mini beans. And remember how we said that mini beans cover 2 stitches. There's a chain and a mini bean and a chain and a mini bean. So for every mini bean we skip, we need to chain 2. So if I'm going to skip 1, 2, 3, I need to chain 2, 4, 6. On the other end of my armhole. So do not count the chain that we did to end that mini bean, to close off that last mini bean. We're going to chain 6 in addition to that chain there. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Now we're going to say, okay, we skipped 1, 2, 3. So now we're going to make the next mini bean in this stitch. And we're going to mini bean as normal, and we're going to continue mini beaning in the side of each mini bean until the end of the row. We're going to do our chains and turns. And now we're going to work our way back up this row and through those stitches. So mini bean in each mini bean until you get back up to the armhole. Of course, your number will be different unless you're making for a teddy bear. And it also depends on what yarn and hook you're using. If you're using a very thin yarn with a smaller hook, then you'll have a lot more stitches than I do on this. With this summing, the Caron 1 pound is kind of on the thicker side of a 4, if you ask me. So now we are back to where we have one more side of the mini bean before we start our armhole. So I'm going to go ahead and mini bean in the side of that mini bean. Now we are going to skip one, mini bean in the next. Skip one, mini bean in the next. Skip another one, mini bean in the next. And this last chain here, that's the chain that we use to close this mini bean, so it's not technically part of the armhole. So now we're going to go into the side of that mini bean above the armhole, and we're going to mini bean in that. All the way to the end. And we have created an armhole. Now we're going to try it on, and I'll explain part 2. So we have just completed part 1 of the cardigan. Part 2 is in between the armholes here. So let me pull out Mr. Bear. We'll try this on him. We'll put this arm through the armhole. He's got a voice box there. I don't want to bump it. So here's how the cardigan will sit. It's going to have a really, once we're done, it's going to curl a little bit like this, and it's going to have just a nice drape going down. Here it is around the back. So right now we're going to be crocheting across his entire back width, right, until we make the second armhole. So how we determine that, how wide to make the back. There's a chart, of course. Okay, you're going to measure from the top of one shoulder to the top of the other shoulder. For him, it's about 5 inches, and we are only crocheting until we get to a portion of that width. So you'll want to check the chart on the pattern. For me, I have a 15-inch shoulder-to-shoulder measurement, so I only crochet to 11.5 or 11.25 inches. He has a 5-inch shoulder to shoulder width, so that means we're going to crochet until we get to 3.75. Again, you don't have to do the math, it's all in the charts included in the blog. So now I'm going to crochet my piece here that we just completed right here. I'm going to crochet until this part right at the inside of this armhole measures to 3.75. So I'm going to continue rows here until I get to 3.75, and then we'll make the second armhole. I'll meet up with you in just a minute. So I have reached the point where I have 3.75 as far as my back measurement. The problem is that my hook is at the bottom here, and I need my hook to be at the top before I start this armhole. So we could go back up this way, but I prefer to come from the top down. So now that I'm at the bottom, if I were to rip this row out, I would only have about 3.25. If I add another one, I'll have about 4.25. So I'm going to add that other one, and if it's a little bit on the large side, that's okay. I would personally rather have it a little bit too big than a little bit too small. So I'm going to do one more row to get to the top again. So I'm going to chain and turn, and I'm going to create a second armhole exactly as I did this first one. So if you remember, and if you need to count, we did 1, 2, 3 right here to start that collar. So now I'm going to do 1, 2, 3. Remember that stitch, that chain stitch at the end of that mini bean does not count. And now since we skipped 1, 2, 3 down here, we're going to skip 1, 2, 3 up here, which means if we skip 3, we need to chain 6. So just double that. If you skip 10 mini beans, then you'll want to chain 20. Just double whatever you're skipping. Now we are ready to go do our skipping. We've got 1, 2, 3 that we skip, so we're going to mini bean in the next. We're mini beaning all the way to the end of the row, and then we're going to do our chains, turn, and come back up through those chain stitches like we did the first time. So now we have completed part 1 and part 2. How exciting! When we get back up to these chains, we're going to go into the side of that mini bean right before the chains start. And we're going to do just like we did before. We skip 1, mini bean in the next. I go through both parts of the stitch. I'm not sure that it really matters because when we add the sleeves, you're going to be going into the side anyway, so just how I do it on this pattern. I think it looks best. Skip 1, mini bean. Skip 1, mini bean. And when you get to the end of the row, you're going to go into the side of that next mini bean and mini bean to end. And now we are going to decide how many rows to do in part 3. So let's take a look. We have an adorable little rectangle with 2 slits cut out. So now we need to figure out how many rows did we do over here, because we want part 1 to perfectly match part 3, right? So part 1, part 2, part 3. To count how many rows you've got, I like to look at the bottom here to see, let's do this side, how to count your rows. I like to do it with the tail to my right. I just feel like it's easier to see these bottom stitches. So we are going to count, and if you think about it, the mini beans are always back and forth. Like one goes this way, one goes this way, one goes this way, one goes this way. So they alternate back and forth. Let's use that to our advantage when we count. So we can start with this one right here. So this is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13. We have 13 rows right here of mini beans. So now I want to do 13 rows right here of mini beans. You want it to match perfectly. If you're not good at counting crochet rows, that's okay. Just make sure that you keep track as you're crocheting the first part, and then write down your number, and then you can make sure that you do the exact same thing on part 3. So I'm going to crochet until I have 13 total rows, and I'm going to count this as row 1, because that is a mini bean row. So I'm going to do 11 more, and then we will be ready to do the outside edging and the sleeves. We're almost done. I am at the end of my 13th row for part 3. Ta-da! So now I have a completed cardigan, which is absolutely freaking adorable. Isn't it gorgeous? Now, remember that since we started with the foundation single crochet over here, we need to end with a single crochet row over here just to make it look more uniform. So what we're going to do is we're going to turn, chain 1, turn, and in order to get that single crochet row, remember that we have 2 stitches per mini bean, so we're going to do a single crochet in each part of each mini bean all the way across. So we're going to have twice as many stitches as we do mini beans, right? So we're going to single crochet in each part of each mini bean, and one of this parts is smaller, so it's harder to get into than the other. One of them is that huge hole, and the other one is that chain that we do at the end of each mini bean. So make sure that you're getting into both sides of those mini beans. When we get to the end of this row, we are not going to fasten off. Instead, we are going to do a reverse single crochet, which is also known as the crab stitch, all the way around the entire cardigan. Now, if you need to watch a crochet tutorial for the crab stitch, I've got that as well. Of course I do. It's a lot easier than it sounds, than it looks. You just really have to get into the swing of things. I'm not really a fan of the stitch, of making the stitch, but I am a fan of the way the stitch looks, so I kind of suffer through it. If you really just do not get the hang of the crab stitch, you can totally do a single crochet row and it'll be fine. Okay, 2 more little guys. Ta-da! So now we have our single crochet on both ends of our cardigan, right? Now we're going to do that crab stitch. So where your yarn is still attached, you're going to chain 1, and on these side rows here, not the long rows, but on these short rows here, or short sides, we're going to skip the first, crab stitch in the next, skip the next, crab stitch, skip, crab, skip, crab, all the way to the end. So I'm going to skip that first one, I'm going to crab stitch in that second one. And like I said, if you need to watch the tutorial, I've got one for you. We got you covered. That's a little too loose. Look at that. Let's start that over. Make sure your first loop isn't too loose. There we go. Much better. We are just going to crab stitch all the way around this bad boy. So skip one, crab stitch in the next, all the way to the end. When we get to the end, we're going to try to get 2 crab stitches as close to the corner as we can. I don't like the way the crab stitch looks when we do 2 in the same, so I just try to get them super close to each other, because if you don't put an extra stitch in the corner, and this is with any crochet, the corner will curl pretty badly. I guess it could be worse depending on your stitch. Okay, so I'm going to go into this one, and then I've only got 2 left, so I'm going to crab stitch in this last one. And then I'm going to try to get one close when I turn it. I'm going to try to get a crab stitch close to the corner up in here. Let's go, this first one looks good. I'll just kind of get that, squeeze that little guy in there. Now, as we are working up the edge of this row, we're only going to place a crab stitch every other row, right? So we are going to place them in these holy parts right here, all the way across. All the way across. So let's get started. Just make sure that you're putting it in that holy part. And honestly, if you put it in the other part, as long as you're consistent and you don't change where you're placing them, it'll be just fine. So I'm going to crab stitch in this manner around the entire cardigan until I get all the way around. I'm going to skip, crab, skip, crab, skip, crab on this single crochet side, and then I'm going to crab stitch all the way back around, and I'll meet you back up when I get to where we started right here. So now I'm almost back to where I started. I'm going to make a little crab stitch over here, make one more somewhere in the corner area. I'm going to clip my yarn. I'm going to pull that straight on through, and I'm going to weave in that end. And then we will work on the sleeves. If you are making the sleeveless version, which I hear you, honey, it is getting warm outside. I actually really like my sleeveless version, so it's a good idea. All you have left at this point is to do a row. I'm just weaving in my end row here, right quick. All you have left is to do a single crochet row around the edges here. Isn't that exciting? Now, it's important to note that, yeah, the sides do curve and that's a little funky looking maybe, but it's also really important to give the front of the cardigan that drape that works really well with this pattern. So let's go ahead and start on those sleeves. When we start this sleeves, you're going to insert your hook in the bottom of the opening for the sleeve. You're going to put it in the side of a mini bean right here, right? So that first mini bean right there, you're going to put it right on the side of that. You're going to want to leave a decently long tail. You don't want it to be too short because we're going to use this tail later on to sew up any holes that are generated in the bottom of this armhole. So pull up a loop. I'm going to pull this yarn through the back here so that we're not playing with it. Now we're going to chain one. I'm going to tighten it up just a little bit. Now we're going to mini bean in that same stitch. Perfect. Chain one to close it. Now we're going to go into the side of the next. Now we're going to go into the side of the next. Side of the next. And now if you'll notice, we are at the top of the armhole here, right? So what we're going to do, instead of going into the side of this over here, if you go into this little chain over here, it's going to make the whole thing up here get really stretched out and really holy. What I like to do at the very top, at the shoulder stitch, instead of going into that side of it, I like to grab part of the actual mini bean itself. So right this mini bean right here, we're just going to go in and take it like halvesies. Okay, we're just going to grab part of that stitch. We're going to mini bean into that. Beautiful. Now we're going to continue our way around. Since we went into the side instead of this holy part, we're going to skip that and go right into the side of the next mini bean. Continue making mini beans in the side of each mini bean all the way around. All the way around. Now, since we're nearing the end of the first row of the sleeve, it's important to talk about how many mini beans you should have on this first row of the sleeve, okay? So the general rule per the pattern is that if you skipped 3, right, or 10 or whatever, let's take 3 for this instance. If you skipped 3, 1, 2, 3, that means that you've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Right? Well, you can't just have 6. So take however many you skipped, multiply it by 2, and then add 2 so that you've got a stitch at the top and at the bottom. Okay? So we're going to 3, 6, plus 2 is 8. Now, if you end up with 9 or 1 more than you should, that's okay. Nobody's going to know. So let's count how many we've got here. I started with 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. It looks like I might need another one here in the bottom. I could go ahead and join this, but I'm going to put one more down here just to make sure it looks really nice and that there's enough space for Mr. Bear to move his arms. So I'm going to have 9, okay, on this first row. Now, when you get to the end here, remember this is why we left a long tail, because any holes that are generated like this, we're going to use that super long tail that we left to go in and sew up any holes. So that's important to remember. Now, when you get around to the top, you're going to slip stitch into the side of that first mini bean. So right here, we're going to slip stitch that together. Perfect. Now we've got our first row of the sleeve completed. Now for every other row, we're going to chain 1 and we're going to turn so that you're looking at the inside of the sleeve. On the even numbers, you're looking on the inside. On the odd numbers, you're looking at the outside. So as we're looking at this, it almost looks like we need to go right here, but that's not where we're going to go. Since this is the actual mini bean, we're going to crochet into the side of that mini bean. So we're going to go right in here. And we're going to put a mini bean right there. Then we're going to go into the side of the next one. So we're going to go in here. And we're going to complete this all the way around until we get to the end. Now at the end of row 2, there is a decrease. And it depends on what your sleeve looks like as to how many decreases you do. And if you decide not to do any decreases at all, it'll kind of be like a bell sleeve, which is actually super cute with this pattern. So it's really just up to you and what you decide to do. Now I'm going to do a decrease at the end of row 2 to show you how to do the decreases, and after that you will just follow the pattern that tells you where to put those decreases. So you'll put them at the end of row 2, and then you'll just follow that pattern as you go through. So now let's make sure that we should have 7 before I do this decrease. Sorry, let me get orientated here. Okay, we are going 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So now we're going to do a decrease over these last 2. So these last 2 where we do the decrease is going to be this one and this one. So this hole right here and this hole right here. These are on the sides of those mini beans. That's where we're going to do our decrease. So I'm going to pretend like I'm starting a mini bean. So right now, if I pull through all of those, that would be the completed mini bean. I'm not going to do that. I'm going to go into the next one and pretend like I'm doing a mini bean in that one as well. Oops. So now I've got all these loops on my hook. What I'm going to do is I'm going to yarn over, I'm going to pull through all of those together, kind of pull it just a little bit. I found that helps. Chain 1 to close that stitch, and then join to the top right here. So this is our first mini bean of the row. We're going to join right here in that little chain space. Boom, row 2 completed. Now we're going to chain 1 and turn, and we are going to mini bean in the side of each mini bean to the end. So here's where we did our decrease. So this is the side of this mini bean right here. So we're going to mini bean on the side, and we're going to continue mini beaning all the way around. And go into that last one, join to the top of that first chain right there where we started the row. And I do recommend, highly recommend, counting your rows at the end of every or counting your mini beans at the end of every stitch row, just to make sure that you're on track. So I'm going to do about 7 rows for him. However many you do, it just depends on how long you want your sleeve to be. I did make a short sleeve version and it was super cute. Made a sleeveless version and that was almost my favorite. And then I've got several that are long sleeved and I like those just as much. The long sleeve ones do tend to relax a bit more after washing. I mean, the entire cardigan tends to relax a bit more after washing, so keep that in mind. So we're going to complete this sleeve. This should be row number 4. I'm going to go to 7, and then we're going to do the finishing parts, and then I'll complete the other sleeve by myself, and then we'll meet back up for the finishing touches. We are so close to being done. And when I get to the end of row 7, which I'm about to do, we're going to do a crab stitch around the cuff. So however many rows you end up doing, at the end of this row, we are going to do, join right here, we're going to chain stitch, and then we're going to reverse single crochet in the holy parts of the mini beans here. So right here in this holy part, we're going to crab stitch. In this holy part right here, we're going to crab stitch. We're going to do it again on this holy part right here. And on the next one, all the way around. That's our last one. Now let's do one more. This is where we joined. So now I'm going to clip my yarn, and I'm going to pull this right on through, and I'm going to use my yarn needle, and I'm going to weave in this end, and then I'm going to complete the other sleeve in exactly the way I did this one. We're going to do the other one, and then we will be ready for the finishing touches, and we will be completely done. So I'll meet up with you here in just a minute. So now I'm done. We have 2 adorable little sleeves on this thing. Isn't that adorable? See how it really opens up? The whole thing, when you wash it especially, those stitches will really begin to relax and it turns into kind of a nice breezy Awesome cardigan. So we've got our sleeves attached. We are going to, since we left these two long tails at the end of, or at the beginning of our sleeves, we're going to weave those in as discussed. So what we're going to do is we're going to hold this up, thread your needle, hold this up, and look for any glaringly obvious holes in the bottom of this armhole. I'm going to just kind of reinforce, because I don't see any glaringly obvious ones. Sometimes it looks pretty obvious. Okay, there we go. There's a decent sized hole that needs to be cinched up, right? So I'm just going to take my needle, kind of weave it around that area just to kind of reinforce that. There we go. Now I'm going to just weave in my yarn end and call that good. Nice. Let me clip that. And then we will have the other side to do. And then we are completely done. How exciting. Okay, let's look for the big hole, if there is one. There looks like there might be one right there. It tends to be on the side. So I'm going to work my way over there, and now I'm going to cinch up that hole. If you don't have holes, then yay for you. You might be using a smaller yarn or making a tighter weave. So let me trim this. Ta-da! We are done. Woohoo! Let's try it on Little Bear. How adorable. Let's stick this in. I'm going to be careful with his voice box. He's got a thing in here that's really loud, so I'm going to try not to hit it. Put his little hand through here without triggering his voice box. Put it in this side. I can be a little rougher with him. Over here. Oh my goodness. It's adorable. Let's see. There we go. Let's pop his collar down. Perfect. Perfect. Oh my goodness. Oh my goodness, I can't handle it. It's adorable. How cute is that? I just love it. Perfect. So this is the Elizabeth cardigan. Of course, you can make it as large as you want or as small as you want. This is probably, oh, I don't know, a 6-month size, something like that. I will note that the wider you do your back width area, the more slouchy it's going to become, especially after washing it a couple times. It's just going to really start to relax and open up. This stitch is kind of forgiving in the fact that it's really holey and weavy, but it feels so good when you put it on, and it's just nice and flowy, and we've got the crab stitches around the front here that really gives it a nice curl. So I hope you love this pattern. I look forward to creating many more patterns and many more videos and tutorials for you here on Heart Hook Home and on the Heart Hook Home YouTube channel. Thank you for watching, and I hope you love your cardigan.